everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This time it's Back to the Future.
Yeah. Again, another interesting topic, I think, leading on from the chat we had last time. I think we can now look to what the future is going to look like, hopefully paint a picture of the way it's trending. So we split it into a few different categories to hopefully cover as many topics as possible. But I think a good point to go from our conversation last time was around the aerospace industry, specifically transport. We touched on flying taxis. Which it seems a very interesting topic and something that a lot of companies, including Archer Aviation, that are building these flying taxis. So I don't know if you want to try and explain that a bit more.
Sure. I think that will be the next big revolution occurring in the aerospace industry. And this is short-haul commute. So you could be talking about suburban transportation, sometimes even cities that are not too far apart. And then obviously Uber is working on its air taxi option where it could go from a certain building to another building, kind of taking people away from the road transportation means that they have right now. And I think it's a great way to introduce a new form of transportation because currently you've got vehicles that are using the road and then you have air transport. And this happens to be somewhere in between, which is a viable option because they've made it really similar to somewhat of a public transportation fare, so you'll be able to engage in these things with a premium, but most people would be paying for it, is my assumption. If you're in a very big city full of traffic jams and rush hour traffic, you'd probably pay the premium to just cut down on your travel time, right?
And do you see that maybe as a natural evolution for where modern cities are going? When we look at a lot of these modern cities, whether that's in Dubai, whether that's in Sydney, they seem to be spreading out further, so that distance to travel maybe into work or to home needs to be quicker, and a way of taking advantage of that is using a flying taxi concept of being able to use the air to the advantage that we haven't supposedly really used it at the minute.
And I would say it's been around for a while in the world of fiction. People wanted to see flying cars. So this could be looked at as an evolution or a step in that direction. Most likely these will be electric vehicles, vertical takeoff and landing, so they wouldn't need a runway to take off and land. That makes them very efficient. They could probably reach to more locations within the city. And as you said, it requires the urban planners to think about having provisions for these things to land. And a good example is also the drones that could be carrying packages or couriers for you in the future. So these are all connected, they're in the same domain. And very disruptive stuff. There's trials happening around the world, and most likely in the next 5 to 10 years they'll be very common.
There's definitely a lot of examples. I mean, we picked out Archer Aviation because they seem to be moving in that right direction and definitely prominent in that area, but there's quite a few to name, I think. So I think if people were to do their research, they could find the amount of different concepts that were shown. But I think another company that are doing things in the right direction are Gravity. So the jet suits, jet packs, obviously looking at Iron Man, sci-fi, it's been a concept that people have seemed to really never think is possible. It always seems a little bit too far, but I think Gravity are showing that using the right technology and using hopefully a right fuel in the future, this will be something that comes more prominent.
We'll get into the fuel in a bit, but I think Gravity is an incredible way of looking at that space. You don't need a vehicle. It's yourself and then trying to get to that point. Obviously you've got jetpacks and they're modeled in a way that they'd go on your forearms and stuff. I just think it's a very disruptive way of understanding travel and also access to remote locations. I believe one of their demonstrations, they were showing how you could get to the top of a mountain, and if you needed to support someone who needs some kind of medical attention, think of the logistical nightmare that is today versus someone in those Gravity jetpacks who could just take 10 minutes to just go from the bottom of the hill to the top, attend to the person, and those kinds of things are life-saving, very impactful, and there's a ton of other applications for it. So that's really futuristic science fiction stuff. You could think of cops in the future monitoring the streets
Yeah.
in those things, right? So that really takes you into that realm.
Yeah.
So really exciting stuff for jetpacks.
That's a really good point actually. I think looking at more from a safety point of view, if you imagine an avalanche happening, and obviously there's a lot of deaths around that, but if someone was able to able to ascend the mountain a lot quicker and find these people, then that's definitely a use case. I know at the minute they're targeting what they're calling a race series. So obviously trying to bring it more into the public eye, they're going to create a race series where they'll travel around the world and show this technology, which hopefully will catch on. A lot like this next technology with driverless cars, obviously a very big thing that seems to have been around forever, and obviously something that Tesla have now made a lot more accessible to people.
Yep.
But I think what isn't sort of necessarily understood is what that next step is and what that looks for us like in the future. A lot of the top car brands, Mercedes, BMW, all come out with these concept cars where they're showing no steering wheel. But what is that actually going to look for us like in the future?
Yeah, I think there's two big efforts right now. I don't know which one's still active, but I think it was Waymo that was acquired by Google, or probably they kind of like separated after. I do not know what the exact structure is right now, but they did attempt to go driverless with their tech. And then you have Tesla's full self-driving capabilities that they've been promoting. I believe it all comes from maybe the science fiction relevance. There is the Total Recall movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who goes to Mars to work, and then he sits in a robo-taxi, and there's a robot in there trying to drive. I believe they would like to go in that direction at a certain point, because these things are capable of sensing stuff around them. But the complications are actually a lot more, I guess, intense than they anticipated. So there's been a few accidents, so people are not so sure if you should let these things drive. And then the traffic lanes are run by humans 99% of the times. And humans are very random. You could be programmed, definitely, but you could choose to do something entirely out of the sequence, which the robots are not prepared to handle, which is what makes it very dangerous in that sense. So I do believe there is a future for them if you could control the lanes, if you could put only robo-taxis on those lanes, they'd work perfectly in tandem. But I don't know if you have other elements and humans and everyone in the same space, might not be the most effective way of managing that sort of transportation.
It's actually probably an interesting topic that we may come on in other sort of examples, is that maybe the thing that's stopping us taking that next step is actually ourselves in a certain way. Is that we almost get in, obviously, like you mentioned, the unpredictability of humans, and is actually something that may hinder us taking that next step. I mean, hopefully with the AI generation, I know we hate to keep going on about it, but that may be something that can help in that area, and something I know obviously Elon Musk is very pro and hopes to see a world like that. And I can definitely, obviously, from a science fiction point of view, they definitely seem to hint at that. From famously, Back to the Future showed, that sort of concept, and expected that to be happening now. But something that also may be happening, again, I hate to mention it again, but boring company Elon Musk, looking at the Hyperloop, Virgin as well, of how we can access underground areas and take those to our advantage, a little bit like the air sort of concept. They're taking an area that isn't used as much currently. So do you see that being something that maybe kicks on a bit more?
I would assume so, because there's been some work in that direction already. We've got underground networks for metro rails around the globe today, so it's a technology that's been explored. I think the Hyperloop wants to go at a faster pace without disruptions or obstacles on the pathway, but you still need to go through a lot of logistical nightmares, like drilling things and pulling the rubble out, which I believe they're trying to address right now. I do think a lot more potential exists for magnetic levitation in bullet trains, because those things are already pushing the limits in countries like China.
Yes,
And it's a very similar concept, but it runs on a railway track. But if you put that underground, that's kind of like your hyperloop. So it's hard to predict which one would be more commercially viable in the long term, because a lot of times these things fall under the realm of public works, which are managed by the governments. It's very, very good that there are some private companies in there, but they're still battling the regulatory frameworks, and they're struggling to probably get these things across. Because I read somewhere that the Hyperloop that Elon Musk is working on is built like a mile or two so far after the announcements have been made, whereas China has already built like, I don't know, 40,000 kilometers for their high-speed rail networks. So that's the kind of like scale that you would need for these things to be more commercially viable entities. So both of them are very exciting technologies, but I would like to, if I were to place my bets, I'll probably go with the bullet trains.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the way current technology seems to suggest. Like you mentioned, the maglev bullet trains definitely have been developed now to a point. Obviously 40,000 kilometres is a bit different to a mile or two of underground tunnels, so you would hedge your bets on that being a very more prominent thing. Whether we look at the future and see, obviously we mentioned before, cities seem to be spreading out, so where it's going to have to cover a long distance, and the quicker it can cover that distance, people are going to gravitate towards that more. From a UK point of view, they've been working on HS2 for years, trying to connect the main cities of the country, and whether that is going to almost come at a time when the next step in other countries is almost, or come about. So I think the key point that we've touched on for all these transport things is that there is that key thing of energy that needs to help them take that next step. And do you think that's a problem that is just an evolution thing that will just come along? It's not going to be, it's more of a time thing. Obviously we can't say when all this is going to happen, but once newer energies are found, is that then a case these will start to come up and be seen a lot more?
Exactly. I think energy is at the heart of what these systems would be relying on. And there's a lot of effort to have more advanced batteries, better capacities, energy densities, and things like that. Different forms of energy as well being explored. So the balance there is you got to be clean as well. So some people may believe nuclear is the option. Should you have nuclear propulsion style devices inside these things? So you could think of it in different directions. Right now, I believe one is getting the mode of transportation. Let's just say if it's trains, and then thinking about what do we need to do with them. Should they still be on the tracks? Should they be in a levitation mode? Do they go underground? I believe sometimes that's stuck in the realm of who owns it, really. So if it's the government, they've got their own agenda. They got to be more populist in their design of things. If it's private, then they would have to prove to people that there's a commercial model, and these things are really capital intensive. So you need to invest a lot of money. You must be willing to be cash flow negative for a while, and then you're going to see the return. So energy is very similar in that space, because there's still a lot of R&D happening. You could, theoretically speaking, even have electric rockets, maybe, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
If it is possible to like get that sort of like density in your batteries, but then there's other sustainable ways, right? But at this moment, we don't see them. But in the future, there's definitely a possibility to move in that direction.
Yeah, I know I've read articles myself on Tesla developing these batteries now that are going to be smaller and more efficient. Obviously, that's key to the success of their company, really. So touching more on energy, we look at what batteries are currently. That's what's holding anything electric back, is the efficiency of these batteries. Ultimately doesn't come to the fossil fuels that we're using to power a lot of our cars, planes. Hydrogen is also seen as another. I know Rolls-Royce have looked into hydrogen engines.
I think they're still working on them, aren't they?
Yes, yeah. I know there's tests, and I know JCB have also done diggers and so forth in hydrogen fuel as well. So it seems to be another avenue, but again, it's just not ultimately fitting our need at the minute.
Yeah.
You can't, obviously, we don't want to keep using fossil fuels, but there isn't anything currently that can replace it entirely.
Yeah.
We look at even using the oceans from tidal and wave energy. There's complications in getting the full efficiency from that as well. So do you see that being a main issue across the energy sort of side of things?
Yes, definitely. I think energy and efficiency are kind of like very related, interdependent that way. And it's also coming down to economics. If you've got a more efficient system, that's going to lead to more economies of scale as you build the infrastructure around it. And I believe some of the ones that you've highlighted, like geothermal, tidal energies, very, very, I guess, lucrative options to look at. But I'm not sure what the infrastructure needs are. And it all comes down to if the efficiency is low, you probably need to go big on the infrastructure side to ensure you make up for the losses in efficiency. That might not lead to very favorable business outcomes. So people would expect the governments to take care of that, and then the governments would then have to pass that back to your energy bills.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be sustainable in that sense because it's a very connected system. However, we should continue exploring those domains just to make them more efficient as we move along.
Yes, definitely. I think work should always be carried on in those areas. I know there are advantages to using tidal and wave energy, that it's something they can predict ultimately, so they can work out the best places to place these and how we can hopefully obtain the most energy from that. There just currently isn't that technology to transfer that into what we need. Obviously within our industry, biofuels for rockets is a big topic. Like you mentioned before, hopefully in the future electricity we'll be able to make electric rockets, which will help us transfer into space a lot easier and hopefully reach Mars and hopefully further than that. So but it is just a case of making that efficiency of fuel and smaller, less weight, especially from a rocket point of view.
I agree.
And I think just to close off on energy, is there one that you see hopefully becoming more prominent in the near future, or do you think they're all just a little bit out of our reach at the minute?
I would say you need more companies like Tesla to just open up avenues for that specific energy mode. So if it's electric vehicles and batteries, they're going to be exploring every possible option to make that system efficient. In the process, the benefits are passed on to everything on the energy device as well. I think if we could have more business models that look at tidal energy, for instance, and they're figuring out ways to push that back into the economy, you'll probably see a more faster growth pace for them. If not, you will need a lot more research. And research is fun because there's obviously a lot of breakthrough happening on a daily basis. But it's the diffusion of that breakthrough into a consumer grade tech that takes like a very long time. So it is definitely possible, but we do not know when in the future.
And again, just to touch on, I think a point that you mentioned was it's almost a question of infrastructure as well as having a product that can use it. Obviously, people have said for a while that there isn't an infrastructure for electric cars, but if we come to a point where electric cars can travel twice the distance they can currently, then that infrastructure becomes a lot more possible because we're not needing charging spaces every a few hundred miles. That then becomes a question, especially in a country like Australia, that we can start to have more of that infrastructure. But I think hopefully moving on to a subject that's a lot closer to our interests and what we're doing at Metakosmos is the medical side. There's a lot of very interesting topics that I think isn't necessarily talked about as much. It's obviously something that in the news is seen very rarely. Just to start, 3D printed human organs.
Human tissue. I think it's a pity that the mainstream popular media's attention for breakthrough technologies is always from the world of computing, text, images, audio, and video. The medical space is incredibly resilient in the way they are innovating things, and they have the same struggles of a commercial entity. So they'd have to make it viable, affordable, and things like that. So some of the biggest inventions, right, of our time, people would just remember computers and all these things, but what about all the vaccines and stuff that have helped people? Saved a lot of people from dying in the medical procedures, and the robotics that are being used in medical procedures today. For some reason, it just gets left out, which is sad. But obviously, as you mentioned, for us, it's the core of what we do. We need to protect the human, so you have to think of these things. And there's so much happening in that space. If you're in the domain, you obviously know that there are a lot of people out there working on technologies that could enhance human life as a whole, and also improve the quality of life for a lot of people through these medical technologies.
Yes, and obviously in the current world, there's so many things that are stopping us from maximising our performance, whether that's diseases or unfortunate other implications where we're finding a lot of people can't maximise their potential, and hopefully this innovation in this area can help really push that. And obviously, like you said, that's something that we really care about and want to put a lot of work into. So looking at these 3D printed human organs, and even an artificial heart which can almost transform what is possible in that area.
I think Artificial Heart, I believe the company is based out of Europe, but it is just an incredible way of understanding how you can literally help someone live. If you're in need of an organ, and today we know there's a shortage of organs, these things are transformative technologies, like literally life-changing things. And if you could print the human tissue and then you make it an organ, it could change the trajectory of someone else's life in the event of an accident or someone needs support. It's incredible. Imagine removing the human heart, placing something artificial, supporting that person's life for an hour, and then bringing things back. That to me is magical and truly futuristic stuff.
Yeah, I think that really summarises the topic we're speaking on today, is how these future inventions are really going to change the world we live in and what is seen as being possible. We see that current trend currently with these wearable biomarkers. A lot of companies, Apple, Garmin, Fitbit, Whoop, it's a real big trend. I think we mentioned it in our last conversation that people seem to really want the data to understand themselves a lot more, which is hopefully going to be accessible a lot more, and the data we're going to get is going to be almost to a point that we're going to have too much, so it's going to be really
an overload of information, right?
Yeah.
I think the fitness tracking devices have done really well by penetrating into the market. There's a bit of a mass market adoption to them, but to your point, they could close the loop in terms of how is it helping people? Is it really being used for the benefits? And so there's an information overload, clearly. The latest Apple Watch has some information on your mental health as well. But diagnosis is one, but actually doing something about it is another thing, right?
Oh yeah.
So if I might be getting some inputs on high rate of heart rates, like in certain periods, but I just look at it and that's just it. I don't act on it. There's no call to action. That would not be the most effective way of using that data, because it's a great piece of technology. Unfortunately, it's stopping itself in the analytics, but the analytics would have to go further into health outcomes, and it should become a closed loop, so you can then start driving better improvements for specific aspects. And that tech is also very futuristic that way. 40 years ago, you probably would have to go to the doctors, get your bloods done. Probably they'd have to test and tell you what your heart rates are. Now you have it on your wrist and you can read them for yourself. So.
Yeah, and it like I think you mentioned, it's that having that call to action. It's people want to know more about themselves now. There's a need to know more about ourselves, whether obviously what we spoke on, maximising the human performance and the only way we can do that is by understanding how to do that.
Yeah.
We're all different. We all need different things to keep us going throughout the day. Some people eat 1 meal a day, some people eat 3. There's so many different aspects to that, but having these products that give us an access to that data is something I think that there's a lot of different aspects that hasn't been looked at yet. Obviously, for our interest, the space, there's so much we don't know, and hopefully that's going to be something we start to understand more.
Yeah, I think biomarkers for space travel is a huge area of interest for us. There are some very specialist companies working on things, but these are very focused areas. I would say musculoskeletal biomarkers for space travel, for instance. But as you said, not enough has been done in the past because of the sample sizes not being big enough. There's got to be a way in which we draw a baseline for understanding the expected outcomes in a space travel for the 95th percentile human, let's just say. But that would change again based on the kind of genetic makeup of that person maybe. So all of that is subject of research, but I'd like to believe you need better data first to get started. You have somewhere to just go and say, this data doesn't make sense, or this makes sense, I need to work on these areas, which can happen with the help of some of these wearables that are out there in the market. It's just about customizing them for our applications.
Yeah, and I think the introduction of, well, I say introduction, but the rate in which AI is coming along, again, hate to mention it, but it is going to, especially in this area, we might be able to spot diseases quicker. We may be able to understand how diseases come to be a lot better because we've got that data to almost provide a roadmap of how things have happened. I think that's something that hasn't been tapped into enough, and that only came about to me because of COVID. I think the need that someone can't just pop to the doctors to understand what's wrong with them. And I remember I went to a talk last year where the NHS have said that they're moving into a new system now where they're going to use products to send people home, but then also keep track of them while they're at home. So these wearable biomarkers are going to make that possible. So in the future, there may be not a need for these massive hospitals because almost your hospital will be your home, and a need for surgery or
personalized medicine, remote patient tracking, all of those things will be a reality, I think, in the near future. The idea is to make it scalable. As you said, you can't have like 1 million hospitals attending to 1 million people, so you want to make sure that your best resources are accessible and available to as many people. And so when you understand it in that perspective, tech can play a great role. It could help bridge those gaps and allow one doctor maybe attend to 1 million people. That is certainly something your telemedicine could effectively achieve. I'm not saying for all kinds of diseases, but certainly a certain grade of issues could be tackled through those mechanisms. Whereas the more specialized and more intensive procedures would require the humans to be there to take care of things. So I think the health space is going to be very critical. It doesn't get spoken about as much, but it's happening as we speak all the time, and it's transforming the lives literally.
And I think Elon Musk being the guy who's in the news all the time, anything that he works on, it does get talked about. The latest Neuralink announcement was that they are now moving forward with human trials, which hopefully will suggest that is going to be something that they're taking advantage of, and we see more in the coming years. Hopefully find, again, looking at some diseases especially associated with the brain, Parkinson's disease is ones that I know a lot more about, can hopefully find solutions to these diseases, whether that's not a cure, whether that's a way to deal with it better, but having these products is going to ultimately paint that picture for us in the future of these diseases maybe being a talking point of the past.
I think so. Brain-computer interfaces will be a lot more accessible in the future to people. And I'm not entirely sure what exactly Neuralink or Elon Musk's plan is outside the disease space for these devices, but I do believe there's a lot that they can do for brain-related issues, and I believe they were talking about things like helping blind people with some vision, not a full-scale 20/20 vision, but then some ability to see. Those are transformative things. Obviously, Parkinson's or spinal cord injuries, all of those things could be at least looked at with the help of these technologies, and it's going to only pave the pathway for getting things into that system and make them better in the long term. So the outcomes for those people who are suffering from these diseases would improve dramatically, because their baseline today is having no support at all. So I think that way these technologies are really transformative, and I think the brain-computer stuff has a lot more potential. It's got the potential to go wrong as well with all this science fiction stuff in it. But I do think the medical use cases have a very strong reason at this point to adopt them.
Yeah, and I think it's important to stress there is a big question mark for a lot of people around AI, and we recently had the letter that came out where a lot of the top executives were asking people to necessarily slow down a little bit, let's be careful what we're doing here. But in terms of drug discovery, in terms of understanding diseases, the power of what this AI is going to be able to give us, I think, can't be spoken about enough. When the internet came out, people saw it as this issue that if gotten into the wrong hands can be horrible. Unfortunately, we have seen cases of that, but I think we've seen a lot more positive cases.
Yeah, it is a net positive for sure. Yeah. I'd like to think of it that way too. I mean, there's still a lot of bad stuff that happens on the internet, but it still plays the role that it is intended to play really effectively. So I think the tech is a tech. Who uses it would actually determine the outcome. So we should definitely consider AI in areas like medical technologies, drug discovery, cancer. So there is, I think, a lot of focus now on using the public data sets that are accessible across the countries, exchange them using some kind of data interoperability standards to benefit the medical research community, so they can come up with effective solutions.
Obviously we touched on the point that there is a lot of data, but in some cases that's important, because the more data we have, the better understanding we have of all these different individuals with different problems, and the ones that are less fortunate than we are. And so I think to almost come to a point with the medical side of things, it is really an area that's really exciting, and one hopefully we can benefit. But I think people hopefully listening to this will maybe pay a bit more attention to it. Obviously health is sometimes we take for granted because we're just going about our lives and worrying about other things, but the people who have been less fortunate than us that have these problems will see the benefits that this can bring.
Exactly. I think, as I said, if tech could become a little more inclusive that way, in the way they cover all kinds of technologies, medical technologies should get the same kind of coverage that these AI applications or consumer-grade electronics get in the media, because they are equally important, if not more important, in terms of making sure there are healthy people around the planet. Right? So.
And that's a great segue to touch on our next topic, which is more of a hardware sort of conversation. And I think we wouldn't do it justice if we didn't spoke about the news of currently, when we're filming this, the week, which is the Apple Vision Pro headset, which is...
It's everywhere, right?
It's a big talking point, and one that I think has brought a lot of conversations in the right areas. It's showing how we're trying to help paint a picture of what the world will look like. If anyone's watched the Apple announcement, they really did a great job of showing how this technology can be used in a positive way. Yeah,
I think Apple's really good at what they do, and they've shown it again.
They must be.
Yeah, they've already shown it to people why it was not just the tech. It's been around for a while, but the way they packaged the entire ecosystem into the device makes it a very exciting, technology for
Yes.
people. I wouldn't mind trying it. I know the prices are very steep right now, but that's just for the early adopters. And at some point, these will be accessible and affordable. And going by the loyal fan base that Apple has, there's going to be a lot of use cases for this technology in the future. There's going to be more apps that will be built to help people understand things. I could totally see how you'd have a medical application inside that thing,
Exactly.
which could then help doctors maybe see what's the problem with the patient at a holistic level. So the possibilities are endless. And I think Apple's certainly taken the bar really high
Yeah.
for that domain.
Yeah, as you mentioned, this isn't a technology that suddenly we were surprised that's come about. VR, I think Steve Jobs even spoke about VR in 2006. So it's been something that's been in the works for a while, but bringing it into a consumer's hand in the home as something that to this point has been a big problem. Meta have give it a go, not seem to get the same response that Apple have seemed to have got this week. Obviously it's a very initial thing and we can't really understand what it's going to achieve, but I think what is really a good thing to stress is that Apple have really put the human in the device, which is something that I know that we really aim to achieve, and as a big focus for us, and that seems to be where they're getting their success. They've done it a lot with their other products, and you see that in a trend of hardware in general. The ones that focus more on the user from an empathy point of view, and also looking at again how to maximize their potential, they seem to gravitate towards those devices.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, human-centered design is such an important thing. Have you seen how the printers are so clunky? Even today, very big machines, because no one's ever thought of how am I going to make this very useful and easy for people to work with. Whereas when you look at something like an Apple Watch or the devices that they build, you want to spend more time with them because they've been devised in a way to engage the human for a long period of time. So having that element in your design architecture is critical. And that's done a lot in the software world. I see a lot of UI, UX conversations, but for hardware or hardware in the loop, when you put humans inside that architecture, very interesting problem. Very few companies can actually solve it.
And I think an interesting topic that came up from this announcement was Apple were almost killing hardware, not only their own hardware, but hardware in general. This was a device that seemed to replace a phone, replace a laptop, replace a TV, replace a number of different applications in the home. And another trend that we look at with a company, Humane, are developing this almost a wearable screen, a screen that interacts with the world around us and uses that to its advantage.
Yeah, I would agree. I think they are another way of looking at it. They're eliminating the need for more devices and pushing it into the next device they build. So it's an evolution in the right direction. That is a computer, right? Vision Pro is essentially a computer that you could put on your head.
Yes.
And it plays the role of your phone, your computer. It could connect all of them to that device.
Yes.
Which I think is a good trend, because you're not saying, get all these devices with you into the new device, versus saying, just bring this device, it will take care of the other devices for you.
Yes.
Which is a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think, I know we're looking more into the future, but just to touch on the past, we look at how Apple took the iPod Nano and the iPod and basically merged that into the phone, and which seems to hopefully be what we're looking at now, is that hopefully there's not going to be a case to carry a phone with us. In the future, they're going to be glasses, they're going to be something that clips onto us that acts as our full.
And another tech that I'd like to highlight was the sixth sense technology that was talked about a few years ago. I believe the inventor was working at the MIT labs back then, spoke about how there would not be hardware. You could pretty much put everything on your fingertips, and then a small device that you could carry on yourself, could go into your pocket, can capture data for you and help you use the environment around you for essentially projecting your computing interfaces, which I think is the future. And if you think of Apple, right, they'll definitely make it more sleek.
Yes.
In the future, will make it a lot more, I guess, user friendly. Because right now it does feel like a big piece of equipment, but I'm sure it will become.
It's from a design point of view, it's still no different to a Meta headset, an Oculus Rift. It's still a VR headset that sits on your head, which doesn't necessarily translate to the vision that we've seen from sci-fi of putting on a pair of glasses and being able to. We touched on Google Lens last time, and that seems to be hopefully what we'll see in the future. It won't be this headset where they're having to project your eyes through the lens. It will be, you'll see your eyes, but what you see from your end will be hopefully what Apple are showcasing now. And I think what's important to touch on is, especially within design, is the inclusivity of things. So Apple have now made it so that people can use their hands. You don't need these other big controllers. You use your hands. An interesting topic and product that I was aware of was they're making technology where you'll be able to have a device within your mouth to control a computer. So from
for people who cannot operate their hands and stuff. So
and I think again that's an exciting area that will make the world an easier place to live for some of these less unfortunate people. And hopefully, I mean, from an industrial design point of view, I don't want to see hardware go, because that's me out of a job. I think there's obviously going to be a need for certain hardware, but it does seem to be a trend that hardware is almost disappearing to a certain extent.
I would say, at least in the computing side, people want to go easy on the hardware, and if you could reduce the power consumption and have more processing, that's the utopian dream that people have. But there are certain elements of hardware, like we're looking at rockets, human spaceflight, hypersonic travel. These things are real world hardware use cases in the traditional sense that will be around for a while before we actually get rid of them as well. But I think at some point it will have to move in a direction where you simplify things. Whether you're working on software or hardware. And Apple is a standout example in that case, because they're doing both. And they're doing it in a way that it is making it easy for people as you move along, enjoyable, and you could indulge in that tech. Whereas the other hardware companies that we think of, good example is those aircraft interiors. They're very hard to work with, right? Long haul flights. I've just recently seen an example of a double-decked chair.
I was going to mention it's created quite a controversy actually this week. I don't know the name of the exhibition or whatever's going on. It must be in that space. But the guy who's come up with this has actually suffered quite a lot of hate in a way, that people aren't seeing the advantages to this. You can fit almost double the amount of people on the same plane, which to an airline's ears is you're just seeing the dollar signs, because they can now put, and I think people need to understand that will make tickets cheaper. You can fit double the amount. They don't need to, cost the same amount of money. I think
that's the beauty of internet these days. That things could just be so polarized so quickly, right? Because there's opinions coming from different quarters. I would definitely put these benefits out there very early on. But as inventors, I know, or innovators, they're not really worried about those benefits. They just go out there to explain how cool that tech is. Like, we're able to see how airliners would jump onto this thing because they're going to pack in more people. For them, that's more money. For the user, it's less price, so they wouldn't care. They'll just jump in and go for the travel. But from a hardware design perspective too, has the interior of an aircraft changed in the last 60, how many ever years?
Only for the first class
maybe.
Passengers.
And all the innovation sits at the front of the plane, right? So people are saying, you got to innovate. It's about time you guys do. And it's a welcome change to see those designs.
I think with something that is so different, it almost really encourages people to hate it in a way, because it's seen as something completely out of the ordinary. But I think people should look at these for what they are, not what they think they are. It's again that old adage thing of reading a book by its cover. I think if people look into this a little deeper,
Yeah.
you know, the prominent thing of climate change in the world and sustainability, if we can transport more people around the world for less fuel and less impact on the world, then that is ultimately producing a positive outcome.
And it's about understanding those benefits, and that's why I say a great tech is just half the battle. It's the way it is taken into the masses.
Yes.
That's a skill that's invaluable, because not every company can do that effectively.
Yes.
So if you can explain the benefits to all the stakeholders in that ecosystem, so the airliners are benefiting, the consumers are benefiting, it's a good net positive for the environment.
Yeah.
Even if a minority group of people think it's a bad idea, people should probably push through with that.
Yeah.
Versus trying to make everyone happy, which may not be possible.
Yeah, and to go back to our conversation we had with innovation and invention, innovation sometimes isn't necessarily seen straight away. There's plenty of examples we touched on last time, but this is a real case of that in my eyes. It is something I think we'll see, no doubt, in a plane sometime soon. The work that's gone into it has made it applicable straight away. Well, obviously that may not be the case in 20 years time, because hopefully travel would have moved on and transport, so hopefully some of the topics we spoke on today. But I think if people were to almost indulge these ideas quicker, we would see the rates of some of these topics move a lot quicker.
Yeah, that is the point of hardware AI, I think. Versus saying, I'm using a piece of software to design my hardware and then it still moves into an arcade production process.
Yes.
You need a way to create the idea and get these samples out. I think a good tool there is additive manufacturing.
Yes.
That's one of the standout examples that you could think of.
Yes.
Well, you need more of those in the hardware space to be able to put together things as soon as you conceive the idea.
Yes.
If you can do that within a day, I think that will have like an exponential impact on the physical things that we're building.
From a design point of view, additive manufacturing has changed the game really. To in the morning, me and you having a conversation, sketching an idea, to then later that evening having a 3D model in your hands of that idea.
Think about a helmet, right? You're thinking about a cool sci-fi design. How cool would it be if you've conceived the idea this morning, in the evening you get that thing in front of you? That's the kind of speed that we're talking about.
And that is something currently that even the Apple Vision Pro headset can't achieve. It can give you a 3D world version of it, but it can't tell you what it feels like. It can't tell you how it feels on your head, the weight of it. There is that gap currently.
And the last example I could give before we conclude this session is the 3D rocket printing company, Relativity Space. It's one thing to have a 3D printing company. It's very hard. One thing to build a rocket company. These guys are, I think, the second most valuable rocket company in the world after SpaceX. They're 3D printing rockets. Now that is an incredible use case of hardware, AI in some capacity. That's accelerating things, reducing the production time by like 30 days or 50 days, and they're just doing some incredible stuff. But we need more of those. We need someone printing cars too, and we need someone building houses using some tech that could reduce that time to like 15 days. So that's how you'd have to understand the real world implications of AI.
So I think what we spoke about is really helping, hopefully people listening and watching this really help paint a picture of how we see the world trending and the way that the world seems to be moving and what it could look like in 20 years time. But I think, do you want people to understand how maybe we fit into that? How what we're working on is going to be in that area? Yeah, definitely. We believe space travel will be very common, will be easy for people to access. And to fit into that world, there's clearly a huge gap today. You need quantum leaps to get to that point where you have mass space travel. We believe we are looking at areas like materials, fabrics, and medical technologies coming together. So it's a very multidisciplinary approach to what we're building that needs to take AI into consideration in different domains, but also build its own AI
framework to build the suits itself
Yeah.
that will take us in that direction. So we're excited about the kinds of tech that we're currently monitoring that's out there in the market, and the roadmap that we have for producing new things.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's something that's become apparent in a lot of the things we've spoke about, is that there needs to be that mindset forward.
Yeah.
There needs to be an understanding of what the world is going to look like, to know what to build to hopefully achieve and work well in that world.
Yeah.
Building suits at scale is clearly going to be something that is very prominent and is a need for that currently isn't available in our sector.
I agree.